Well, Jeff, it's good to have you today. Welcome to the We've Connected podcast.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. How are you surviving amidst the pandemic?
Well, surviving. We've got 4 sons that are all still home. My oldest is a senior in high school. And so in some ways it's slowed down time to have a little bit of extra time with them before they start to fly the coop. And in other ways, it's been really, really challenging. But
You're always cooped up. I can't imagine.
Yeah, learning a ton and business keeps on going. So it's been fun.
Well, with that, so we've kind of introduced you before. You're a product guy. With this pandemic, the change especially too, we could very well be doing this in person, but we're not. What are some of your initial thoughts on how this might affect product development, any kind of product development?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think if you have a really defined plan that the team and teams are executing on, this can work really well. We've seen boosts in productivity across a lot of our teams because they, in many cases, just needed time and the ability to sort of block out other distractions, meetings, et cetera, things that are just to really progress on your critical strategic initiatives that you need to make progress on. Where I think this is going to get tougher as this gets more protracted, and there are some groups that will not go back to work for 4 or 5 or 6 months. I've heard of obviously what's happened with Twitter and the Shopify announcement from today, which was we're going to be kind of remote first forever. It becomes harder to get people in the room and talk about some of the longer term, more challenging, like strategic initiatives that you've got to work on. And usually that includes a whiteboard. Usually that includes a fair amount of give and take. Usually that includes reading body language and people's reactions. And humans are trained to kind of do that. And especially humans who are sort of leading a dialogue and trying to get to a clear outcome. I've tried to use proxy tools, like I'll open like a Google Slides and everyone will look at it and I'll like try and draw boxes in real time. And for anyone who's seen my handwriting, that they think it's an upgrade that I can use the Google Text, but it's just a little slow and it's not necessarily as organic in kind of the way that it happens. And so as we're like, okay, we came into the year, this happened in March, we knew our plan, we were executing, and that was actually, we like sped up, it was great. And now as we get into the summer and where I'm at Weave, we're going to be working in a distributed fashion, probably for certainly for the next few months. I'm thinking to myself, how do I get everyone and their best ideas into a room and talk about 2021 and 2022? And I think that will be a challenge for business leaders in any industry.
Well, when you talk about a business that relies so much on ideation happening in these small one-off conversations, this is a huge problem to be solved that someone very well could step up to the plate in 2020. I feel like the record I'm playing over and over again is that 2020 should be, hopefully will be the year of entrepreneurs because there are so many issues like this to be solved.
Yeah, and if you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to get a pitch in front of a VC, that used to be, you'd have to get someone to give you a bunch of intros on Sand Hill Road, and you'd have to get into a bunch of in-person stuff. And to me, I think it actually democratizes access to funding a bit. I still think there's going to be a strong bias towards tech centers like Silicon Valley and New York and Austin, et cetera, where there's like proven winners and a pretty good like engineering labor force. But I do think now access to great VCs is only now a Zoom call away. And these groups, I think, are now much more comfortable operating and meeting and funding entrepreneurs under that sort of context than they ever would have been even 6 months ago.
So you're thinking that is when you're talking about democratizing, meaning just anybody geographically, or do you think it has a bigger implication than that?
Yeah, I think if you can network in, which can happen digitally, to get to the right people, you can set up a Zoom call and investors can meet founders and, pitch decks and actually get funded, I think in many cases without actually physically meeting. And I think that's going to be a pretty new dynamic that didn't exist before sort of this pandemic happened.
Yeah, which could mean by doing that, right, the more ideas you get, the more diverse demographics, backgrounds of these people with these ideas will have things that we never could have imagined before because of that. I had never considered that.
Yeah, I think you are going to see some barriers break down. You'll lose a little bit of the groupthink that can happen in some of these tech center bubbles.
Yeah.
And you're going to get exposed to sort of different ideas and also solutions that are really aimed at demographics that aren't the demographics of Silicon Valley or New York. And which is really relevant to us because we're obviously operating in the SMB space and all the opportunity there. And that's, there are 30 million SMBs nationwide, and they have all sorts of problems for entrepreneurs to solve. And I think it's going to be a great way to sort of get some of these VCs exposure to that and their opportunity to fund and grow these businesses that will help solve problems all over the country and hopefully globally, rather than just in these sort of isolated areas.
Yeah, because you think of who's behind creating products and how that influences the effectiveness of that product. And why that's such a big deal for tech companies in general to have a diverse workforce. If we begin first with a diverse idea, you just blew my mind. This is really awesome to think about.
And then you'll get a distributed workforce.
Yeah.
So now access to talent isn't just, well, who will come work in Salt Lake City or in Boulder, Colorado, or in Kansas City or in Seattle. Now that we've sort of broken down some barriers, access to capital, access to ideas, access to entrepreneurs, and access to talent, all I think are going to be accelerated as part of that. Now it's painful now, but I think the long-term outcomes of this overall for American business and for entrepreneurship are actually going to be really positive. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. And I think that just added a new layer to it for me. But so now that you feel like there's this democratization of ideas, barrier to entry has been lowered in terms of who and where and when and why they come to a VC and get funded, hopefully because they're seeing more diverse ideas, they're realizing that whether it's applicable to them. I think of one of my heroes, Melinda Gates, and her.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah, she talks a lot about making sure to fund women-founded companies, and a company that they founded or that they backed was proposed by an African-American woman, and it had to do with styling African-American hair.
Sure. Yeah.
Proposed that idea over and over again to all these different firms, and they're like, no, there's not a market for that. But they only felt that way because it wasn't a market they were familiar with. So it'll be interesting to see as they're exposed to these new ideas that maybe they hadn't considered before, how that then opens up different things to be produced. But with that, as these ideas are coming out, how do you feel like people, entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, or even entrepreneurs who have to deal with product development, go about rethinking now, pivoting based on these new circumstances? And we don't even know all of the implications of what this is going to cause to our world 5-10 years from now.
Yeah. I think the businesses that thrive coming out of this period of time will be those who are most connected to not the needs of their constituencies last week, but the needs of theirs today. And certainly at Weave, and when we serve a variety of small and medium-sized businesses that are generally service-based businesses, the world flipped. Mobile took center stage, and the ability for the employees of these businesses to be able to completely run their business without actually physically being there became really, really key. The ability to take payments in a way that was safe, secure, contactless, et cetera, became really, really key. The ability to kind of manage things like curbside waiting rooms, and because then people aren't going to gather now in this waiting room with the highlights magazine and wait for your name to be called. They're going to be sitting out on the curb And that all has to happen over text. And okay, what about filling out the forms? And what about the payment? And what about the insurance card information? That now, in many cases, now will not actually be a physical exchange that's done. It will happen all digitally. And so the businesses that streamline that can just actually focus then what's actually happening inside of these businesses just to be on the service that they're providing. And that's actually, I think, the magic is every business has like the thing that they sell, and then there's all the things around it that suck, that just are part of the thing that they sell. You know, like if I go to get a hair appointment, okay, well, the whole process of making an appointment, of doing the sale, when do I tip, blah, 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 if there's insurance or forms or, timing, who's the style, like all that sucks. The service that you get is awesome. And so where I think these businesses will mature is, how do you take all the parts of receiving a service, whether it's a medical service or a health service or a med spa service or a financial service or whatever type of service, about receiving the service that suck, and clean all that stuff out, abstract it from the user as much as you possibly can, and just let the people and the employees focus on the part of the experience that is awesome, the core thing you're actually paying to get. I think you're going to have happier customers. I think you're going to be more efficient as a business. And so, to sort of answer your question, how do you rethink all these things? Well, you have to tap into how both the business and their customers are feeling in this new sort of hyper germ sensitive world that we're in, and that not everyone is going to feel the same way. That's the other thing that's going to be really challenging. There are some people who are just going to keep going the way that they're going to go, and they actually don't want to change the way that they're doing things. You have to accommodate them. And then there are people who are going to be on the other end of a spectrum who are going to be as prophylactic as possible about everything that they're doing. And I think we can use prophylactic as an adverb, but anyway, that he's like, okay, well, we don't want to lose them as well. Well, if this is your preference, we have a solution for you. I was just at a restaurant the other day, and it was really fascinating. So they had opened up inside service. So it was just the table. There was 10 feet between every table. The server had a mask. So if you wanted to go in and get service, they had like a solution for that. But then they also had a whole curbside thing. So if I just would sort of pull up and text, they would come and they'd actually come out to you. If you wanted to come in and do a to-go order and walk out with it, they were ready to go there. Completely sanitary, contact free. It's like, just depends on your level of how much you want to be present and engage and be familiar with large groups inside the bounds of our, sort of guidance of our public health officials. These businesses are like adapting in real time, saying, no matter how germy you want to be within the bounds of safety, we're ready to go. We can support your need. And I think all these groups are thinking about how do they pivot and catch up to that.
Yeah, you definitely have to accommodate the lowest common denominator, and in this case, it's the one who's overly cautious, overly scared, panic-ridden. Yeah.
Yep. And especially if you're selling anything related to healthcare or med spa, you cannot appear to be casual about any of that stuff. You only want to get involved with businesses that are going to the utmost degree of like safety and awareness, and they're willing to take it down for someone who is maybe not as worried about it. But you want them to have considered everything, because most humans are not public health experts. They need thoughtful expertise and sort of guidelines being followed by the businesses that they want to go visit. So I actually think it's a way for brands to differentiate themselves a little bit. Like, if COVID's an issue for you, you're going to want to go to this restaurant, avoid this one. You're going to want to go to this dentist, avoid this one. And I think you'll start to see them separate versus how much they're able to accommodate different preferences of their customer base. And
even with that, there could be end up being we've got Google reviews, but there could be like a health rating or something,
Could be. Yeah.
You never know. And I even think of, you're talking about these things, and I wonder how much to remove touch, right? We've done things, and Weave does this, right? Contactless payments is a big one. Touched on a few other things, paperless forms. I start to wonder, like, futuristically, what might we do to incorporate voice or our eyes, or and it's kind of cool to think that this might be the catalyst to push us into that kind of technology.
Yeah. It usually takes a car crash to widen the road.
Yeah.
And we're kind of going through a car crash here. It's a global pandemic, and there's a lot of negative health effects and tragedies that are happening. But you're right. I think it's also speeding some innovative thinking for how the world will proceed going forward.
Yeah. So given your background in product, but also within organizations, I'm curious to hear too how you feel like people, stepping back from a typical definition of an entrepreneur, but how people can be entrepreneurial or an intrapreneur within an organization.
Yeah, and it's funny because if you look at my background, I started my first 10 years at Nike, which was 25 to 30,000 employees. Although an entrepreneurial and innovative spirit that's driven that brand, for 42 years of being relevant, young, and on sort of the cutting edge of athletic technology all the way back to 1972. And then I spent close to a decade at Vivint Smart Home, where we were using AI and various technologies to build a whole smart home with connected locks, lights, cameras, thermostats, voice, etc. Yeah. And then I've been here.
You go from physical product company to hardware and software, and then a similar thing at Weave now too, hardware and software.
Exactly, because obviously we're in phones and in payments, and those all have a hardware component, and then we've got the full complete toolbox for small, medium-sized businesses built around sort of phone, text, voice, analytics, marketing tools, etc. So, but it gets to this interesting question around entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship. It's funny. I really feel like I learned to sell and learned to get momentum and persuasion around my ideas at Nike. Nike actually is interesting. It has a very matrixed organization that does not lend itself to very clear top-down decision-making. And I actually think it sort of by natural selection was built that way intentionally. So it is a matrix by which the best ideas and the most persuasive thinkers could create change and progress both the product and the brand sort of inside of that organization. And so, you've got to be, it's funny. I've always been asked, like, okay, well, what is the spirit of an entrepreneur? What does it take for them to be successful? There's a little bit of, you need some irrational confidence. Like, you really are naive enough to think that the thing that you're pitching that you can do is doable, and you really believe it. And that plays a huge role.
Or even that no one's heard of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I know someone else has talked to you about this, but let me tell you haven't heard it like this. And that's part of, so much of whether ideas get funded either with internal big company money or from investors is like, is the idea compelling, and does it clearly compel you as the person who's pitching that idea? And do you have the confidence that this can be done? And, there's the sort of the great quote from the Apple ad, and I actually have it up on my wall. It says, because the people who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones that do. And so that they're just crazy enough to think that they can change things. And I think that's really, really key. Two, I think that also comes out in that there's a cause that you deeply believe in, because if in order to really grind through the lean and challenging times and recruit people to buy into this mission, to go through the valley of death here of getting an idea up off the ground and not seeing results and dealing with hurdles and pitfalls and all the things that sort of can threaten a nascent idea, the thing that gets people through that is like, okay, well, but are we doing something that matters to the world? Like, is this a cause that's worth fighting for? And I think that comes out of people wanting to come work for you, and then last from an investor standpoint, they'll see that as well. Like, you want to fund missionaries, not mercenaries, as they say, and you want to fund people who have such conviction around what they're doing. And I think last, to have credibility, because whoever you're going to raise funds with, especially if it's inside of a business, and it won't be the first thing or last thing that you champion with those who are stakeholders and dollar holders, whether it's your board, whether it's your boss, etc., is you have to have a willingness to be wrong. And I think it was Jeff Bezos that said, I'm stubborn on the vision, but flexible on the details. And like, you have to say, this is what we think we can do. And if you're so stubborn that you can't see right in front of you that the way you're trying to do it isn't working, you need to be able to be the first one to identify that, suggest a pivot, and then go tell your stakeholder, yeah, we tried that, it didn't work, but then we tried this, and now this is working, so good. And they'll nod their head and say, great. Well, you can't come back to your stakeholders, to your investors, and say, yeah, we're just going to keep trying. I mean, it hasn't worked so far. You have to realize when it's not working and pivot quick. If someone has to tell you to pivot, you're not going to be successful as an entrepreneur. You have to have that kind of instinct first. And I think that's the case in large companies and in small. And the nice thing about large companies is there are dollars there. Yeah. Your job usually is not on the line if you fail. And so there's that can be both sort of good and bad, but there's usually some institutional things that you can build off of, like a successful brand, successful go-to-market, already retailers support, deep dollars to invest into, the ways to take payments, et cetera. Usually inside of a big company, you just have to build the new thing. And then there's usually infrastructure around it that can help it be successful and faster. But then you're also going to deal with stodgy old thinkers who we were successful doing things this way. Yeah. And we're just going to keep doing it that way. Or we pivot from this to this, that threatens me or my job or, my status or my role or my organization or my funding. And it's you're going to have to power through that. They're just different types of obstacles, but they're still fraught with challenges, and they still need someone who can power through all that stuff.
Right. So the last conversation I had was with Kurt Roberts, our venture capitalist friend. Sure. And one of the things he said was, when looking to fund someone, they typically want a pair first. Funding a single person isn't necessarily something that they want to do, but they're looking for a pair where one knows how to build the product and one knows how to sell it.
Yeah.
And just as you were talking about that, I was reminded of that, because whether you're in an organization or out, when you have an idea, you're usually going to be pushing against a status quo. Mm-hmm. And you need to not only know how to build it, but how to sell that idea.
100%.
Convince and persuade those people who have operated this way for so long, especially given our current context, right? We operated in certain ways for a long time, and this is turning our world upside down. Yep. That even within an organization, there are ideas to be had, moves to be made, but you do need to have those skills. How am I going to build it, and how am I going to sell it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and selling it is multiple different layers. I have to sell the idea, then I'm going to make the thing, and then I have to figure out how to get the market to want to buy it. And then I got to get out incremental investors to want to buy it. And it's all, selling is an art. I mean, it's just you can have the world's best idea and terrible instincts on how to sell and go to market. And that idea, unfortunately, is going to die.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were talking about how you learned that ability within Nike, though. Uh-huh. What were some of the instances where you felt like, due to your ability to sell, something either fell flat or soared?
Yeah. No, I remember. So for 3 years, I led all sort of the go-to-market and sort of the product experience around Nike's custom shoe business, which was called Nike ID. And the ID stood for individually designed. And we were doing at the time between 1 and 2 million pairs of shoes. These were custom one-of-ones, cut and sewn in Asia, and with your name on them, your colors, your performance choices, and it'd come in the mail, and it would say Casey Brothers on it, and it would have your colors, and maybe if you were overpronator or extra wide foot, or you wanted it to be waterproof or outdoor traction, it would have all that stuff. And when I sort of got to that business, they were sort of doing this customization service mostly on kind of like the workhorse, boring team shoes in the portfolio. Like if it was in the basketball case, they didn't have like the Kobe's or the Jordans or the LeBrons. They had like the Team Elite. And that was like this shoe they just knew they'd do 500,000 pairs on. It would come in a gazillion colors. And it's just kind of like, it was cool, but it wasn't like the kids who were interested enough in customizing their own shoe wanted to customize the signature product. It always had the latest technology. It was the way that the kid identified with the athlete. And, you know, kids tattoo and brand themselves in ways that don't include ink. The brands that they wear, the people that they follow, how they project on social media, and like what athletes, celebrities, etc., that they connect with, whether it's musicians, artists, and that's what the whole signature shoe business is based around. It's based around, you're not really buying a shoe. You're not buying leather sewn to rubber. You're buying an athlete. You're buying, and you're ascribing yourself to that, to that tribe.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so one of the things that drove me nuts was that LeBron's shoes were not on Nike ID. I mean, he was the king of the king. And it's like they were top of the line. And one of the groups before me had gone in to pitch him on it, and it didn't go great. And one of the reasons for that is LeBron had grown up in sort of the days of the very limited release Jordan shoes, where the kids would line up 150 deep outside of a Nike store. Usually there's some violence involved trying to get to the better spot in line, and which I do not condone. That, you know, and that there was a limited color and a limited thing, and that was kind of how he thought success was. You had the one shoe, the single drop, everyone lines up, and the idea that with Nike ID you could log on and come up with literally 1 million different permutations of your shoe was anathema to him. It seems very counter to what he thought of being a signature shoe was. And so I sort of took that feedback and I said, okay, we're gonna go back to pitch this. And it's funny, like he had his sports marketing handlers, which are kind of like his agent, but they worked for Nike. There were all different people, and they sort of said, okay, well, if he's gonna do it, you got to present to him and get him to do this. And so I sort of gulped, you know. And when athletes come, it's like signature athletes come to the Nike campus, they usually come about once or twice a year, usually once. And when they come, they have like a 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. schedule where they sit in a room and go through every part of their business. Okay, apparel guys show up. Here's your latest apparel. Here's your numbers. Here's the designs for fall of this year. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to wear this in the game against the Knicks. This will be your playoff thing. Like, okay, boom. And then the footwear guys, here's what we're thinking. You need this new airbag technology that's going to handle the weight, size, and torque you're putting on this outsole of your shoe. And here's the inspiration. It was the Hummer that you bought in your senior year. And like it's all day, the whole day. The PR people come in, the entertainment marketing people come in. And then like by the end of this, these athletes who are just used to playing ball are exhausted. So guess who had the 5 p.m. slot? I did. And so I show up and he's tired, and I could tell. And I sort of had this idea. So I knew that LeBron loved Jay-Z, and they had a relationship, and Jay-Z had this famous kind of symbol that he would do, and LeBron would do it in his younger years, and so they had a relationship. And a couple of months before, Jay-Z had recorded an album. And before he released the full album, he just released the lyrics, like the audio of the lyrics. And he went to all the local DJs, not just local, but global DJs, and say, put your own beats against my voice. So they all would come up with their own tracks, their own samples, their own beats, and they would pitch this stuff back up, and they were like releasing it. It was the coolest idea. It was brilliant. And so before his like official track dropped, you could hear the voice and the lyrics being dropped and interpreted by all these different DJs. Everyone had customized it and made it their own, right? And that was actually the way that modern brands were working, is you're willing to sort of give up a little bit of that ownership in a vulnerable way and let your fans really grab hold and shape who you are and even what your product is. Right?
Oh my gosh.
And so that was JG. So you can see where this is going.
Yeah.
So I sort of pitch him on this whole thing, and I'm like, dude, this is your opportunity to do this with your shoe. Now your silhouette has your story. It's your product. It's your life. I mean, he grew up playing basketball on a milk crate that was nailed to a telephone pole. And we did the outsole of the shoe shaped exactly like the pattern of a milk crate. I mean, we weren't ever going to change that stuff. His story, his icon, his essence was coming to life in that product. But anyone, anywhere could have done their colors, their name, their patterns, they could take it and make it personal to them. And I'm like, this is exactly what Jay is doing on the hip hop side. And this is exactly what you can do with footwear. That's what the king does. And lo and behold, and by the way, I failed on a gazillion pitches. On this pitch, it worked. And so, hey, I remember him looking at me saying, wow, you woke me up. Because he was tired after the end of kind of a long day. And we ended up getting the LeBron shoe on Nike ID, which then that led to getting the Kobe shoe and the Jordan shoe. And it sort of turned a business around. It was kind of just like, get the boring team shoe and color it in your colors to now know the coolest of the coolest can go in and customize the best product on ID. And that was really kind of a fun moment. But I remember staying up 3 straight nights, working on the pitch. You know, I had to sell. And even though I was working for a big company, the stakes were high and the opportunity was huge. And this was a business that Nike ID even by itself was like, you know, between $100 million and $500 million business like during that time. So it's not like there wasn't a lot of money to be made in that kind of process, even though it was just a cog in a smaller part of that gigantic company. So,
well, the thing I love about that is that people often forget how key emotion is in a sale. Mm-hmm. It's so easy to rely on the what. You get the leather seats and the stereo package and the sunroof.
Yeah.
But why?
Yeah. The whole back of the box.
Yeah.
This feature. Yeah.
You'd identified not only the emotion to sell to LeBron, like to connect him with why this product was important, but you'd found that like the emotion behind buying a unique shoe, that to your phrase I loved, like kids will brand them any way they can, whether it's ink or not, or brand them, right? And how cool is it to think like, oh, our high school team will all have the same shoes. They're going to be LeBron, but they're going to be our school colors. Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened. It's like, you know, what XY high school is like, we all got bronze. And what would be really cool is the teams would come together and sometimes they would like design their LeBron together that they were all going to wear. And it was like a bonding experience. And it was really interesting.
For the lifetime value of them as a customer.
Yeah, they're never leaving.
No.
It's like forever.
For life.
Well, not only that, the minute they have a child, they'll start putting little tiny Nike sneakers on that kid and little Jordan shirts, and the whole cycle just repeats itself. That's why Nike is going to do $40 billion this year in revenue. $40 billion, okay? That's like, I don't know, probably close to 1.2 billion pairs of footwear, apparel, and equipment. Like that many units is what would be like required to do that. And so it's like, you don't get there if you just have kids. You have to have kids, teenagers, their parents, and their parents' parents, and you have to do that in 150 countries. Like that's how you get to that scale.
Yeah, but that emotion is so key. And I feel like when you're an entrepreneur, whether it's coming up with an idea, establishing a business, or an entrepreneur within a business and trying to sell an idea, right? It's so easy to get caught up in that feature functionality, the what, the execution, because you've had to noodle on that. You had your why probably that inspired you and got you working on it. And then you had to grind through to figure out more things. And then it's easy to then lean on that when it comes time to pitch it to a stakeholder or a venture capitalist or a customer.
Yeah. Yeah.
When
One insight there, I would just say, like, as an executive in large companies, you are looking for people who are dissatisfied with the status quo. You're looking for people who don't need an org structure or a title to get things done. You're looking for people who bring energy into a meeting and a conversation. So what if we tried this? You know, the thing we're doing now, that sucks. What if we did it like this? And if they can pair execution with that idea, they can actually, you like, I want to fund you. I love that you have this idea. If I give you this, can you make this happen? And how can I give you air cover support, feedback, strategy, etc.? If they can do that, those are the next leaders of any company of any size. And so if you're, by the way, if you're working for a company and they don't love that, they're not looking for people to be dissatisfied with the status quo and challenge things, get out of that company. Because you're listening, if you're listening to this podcast and you're in that company, it's not a match. So find one that they really sort of engender and celebrate that type of thinking. But I just tell you, as a leader, sometimes people are like, well, I'm not the boss. That's not my job. That's for someone else to choose. I'm just this peon. I've only been here a while. And I can tell you that is not the case. Leaders are looking for the next generation of people to disrupt the company before their competition disrupts them.
Right.
And Nike's totally that way as well.
Yeah, you're beating the Simon Sinek drum, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Playing the infinite game, finding your why, communicating your why, and not leading with that what is so key when it comes to those beginning stages. And then it led to your story with Nike, right? This expansion of what, I mean, would you say that Nike ID started out as the step cousin or?
Oh yeah. No, we were the last part of any marketing offense. They're like, yeah, we'll launch the product and do all these things. Oh, and then like 90 days later, we'll put it on Nike ID. I was like, no, we should do that first. Like, we should lead with it. It's the limited edition engagement that the most hip of the hip kids get to do first. And we'll limit the numbers, but the hype that we'll get around it will be awesome. And someone has to look at these things orthogonally and say, wait, there's a different way to do this that we can kind of use this. And you can hear, even in I did that pitch in 2010. I mean, this is 10 years later. You can still hear the passion that I have for that idea.
Yeah.
Like, even now, how fired up I even still am about why this needed to happen and how cool this would be. And that comes out. And so it's okay to be human and excited and let your emotion and passion in a way that marks you as competent. But like, when you're making that pitch, because humans are genetically programmed to respond to passion and emotion.
Yeah.
Whether you agree with me or not, you will not be bored by what I'm about to tell you. And that's the key part of the pitch half the time is it's just not interesting enough. And it's like, let that come out. And I think that's a real kind of winning combination.
Yeah. Well, with that, I'm really interested to hear what your 3 takeaways are for people listening.
Yeah. So, and it's a great question. We live in a generation now where there is no excuse to not have learned every possible lesson that you could learn without having to do it the hard way. And what I mean by that is, point one is learn from those who have trod the paths before you. And that's everything from chewing up great podcasts, great books. Secrets of Sand Hill Road is a great one I would recommend for anyone who wants to understand just how the venture capital game works. Obviously, books about running startups like Lean Startup, Hard Thing About Hard Things, 0 to 1. All of these things are great books, whether you're starting a small company or you're trying to do sort of disrupt things inside of your company as well. They're all super relevant. Innovator's Dilemma, Innovator's Solution, all of those things. There's so much information, most of it free or incredibly cheap, that if you want to fancy yourself someone who can bring new ideas to life, you can't go make the mistakes the first time that you could have avoided. Because there's a legion of dead companies that say, man, if we just would have done this, I think our thing would have worked. And then they have to go back and say, well, had someone else made that same mistake before you? And has it been recorded somewhere in some great book, some podcast, some detail? And I just avoid the potholes that someone else has already tripped in and flagged. So learn. Two would be, I think it's funny, like you're about to start a renovation at your house. I can tell you that most renovations start with one simple act that just starts the spiral going.
Oh,
like I can remember I lived in this house and the architecture was really bad, how they had planned it. And I always thought these two rooms that were adjacent to each other were like, man, if only these were one room, this house would all work. It would work as a playroom for the kids, a bonus room. Let's do that. And then we're like, well, how are we going to do that? Think about all these steps. We have to get a drywall guy. And then we'd have to, if it's weight bearing, we'd have to go. You know what I did? I took a hammer and I just pounded in between the two studs to see what was in there. And the minute I just pounded through that wall and found out, hey, this isn't load bearing. Wow, we could take this up. The whole remodel started. And 5 months later, and a huge pain in the butt later, but you need that first act, that first thing that thrusts you into it. And I think if you're an entrepreneur, whether you're inside of a company or not, sit down and write a deck that's a pitch deck for your ideas. That's free.
okay.
Sit down and no, yeah. So number one is learn from everywhere you possibly can.
Oh, yes.
Number two is act. Sit down and start actually putting a proposal together. What is the TAM? Why is this idea ripe for disruption? What advantage would you have for winning? Actually start to put the unanswered questions. And then three is sell.
Yes.
Start selling. Start the conversation with your peers, your friends, potential investors, employees, your bosses. Just learn, because the first time you pitch your idea, it's going to suck. It's the 9th time that you start to actually shape a narrative that someone can really track and then make it really concise and like easy to follow. Yeah. So those would be the three things. Learn everything you possibly can. Just act. Start putting something on paper. Take that first hammer and put it through. And and it sort of thrusts you into this thing. It's like there's no going back. And then lastly, sell. Like start the conversation of like, once you've started to put these ideas together into something that's cogent, that's coherent, that you could now start selling it, because you may find you sell yourself right into an investment, right into a co-founder, right into your
prototype,
your first 4 hires, a free prototype. You can, and it often happens in this sort of organic way, but you have to just start selling. And that skill of selling, you'll use your entire time, whether you're the CEO of the company for 20 years or just while it runs its own life cycle. So those would be my 3.
Oh, I love it so much. I've been inspired by this conversation. I just feel like the wheels in my head are just moving. Cool. Thanks again, Jeff.
My pleasure. It's been fun.